Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment if you want to leave a comment, leave us something, ask a question, or just say, hey, thanks guys, great job. Besides that, go to our website, legendsofthesuperstitionmountains.com. Got the bark notes, some stuff there. You can pick up stuff, hats, shirts, whatever. We do it pretty much at cost, so we're not making anything off of it, but it's our way of saying thank you for supporting our channel. Also, sunsets, Amazon Prime. Pick up a copy. We're going to have them here locally and all, but we have them on DVD, Blu-ray here locally, and they are available through Prime to rent and download. Things are going well with it. Nothing but 5-star reviews, so it's great to see that, and thank you everybody for all the great feedback on the film. That being said and done, let's get into today's story. And today's story came to me because someone asked me a question about, well, what about this story and this story, and how they go together doesn't make sense sometimes. And I tried to point out that a lot of treasure hunters will matrix things together, and it's very easy to do so because they tend to look at the similarities but not the other problems associated. It's just the fact that people have found the Lost Dutchman and they're like, well, I found the tunnel. It goes right through the mountain. And it's like, well, that's not what Walt's described. But because they found a tunnel, they don't care if it fits the description. Well, this kind of leads into the story. This is a story, and it basically, for the most part, we'll say it takes place in the plains of Utah. But it covers a lot of ground, and you'll understand this by the time we get to the end and why it gets matrixed. I found it under one file, and I looked at the file, and then once I started going through all the pages, I was thinking, hold it, and then I started doing my background checking on things, going, well, I got some problems here because it seems things are jumping around more than they should. The places don't seem to follow the other places. The story starts with Frank Lane and John Howard. They're both graduates of Yale College to become attorneys. But they're young men. They really feel like they really want to get out in the world. And for some unknown reason, they read some stuff and articles and some things about the mountain men and trappers and people out in the Rocky Mountains and finding gold. And these two young men decide they're going to put together an outfit and they're going to go out into the Rockies and look for gold. So probably that last big adventure before we settle down into a normal life as an attorney here back east. So the two young gentlemen travel out. They go up into the Rockies. They meet trappers and prospectors and mountain men everywhere. And they get along quite well. It's a great adventure. They're really enthusiastic through that first year, but they're not finding any gold. And they're checking with people. No one else seems to be doing that well. So they work down into the foothills. And they finish that first year into the foothills, and they realize it's not going well. We're not finding anything. We're having the time of our life. Great experience, but we're not finding anything. So they kind of shelter for the winter in town, think about it, go, we'll give it another summer, and we'll see what happens next year. So in the spring, they get back out, and they move out more into the plains. Now, this is where the Snake Indians are. They're the Northern Paiute, Northern Shoshone, but those groups are usually referred to as the Snake Indians in those areas. And they're kind of in this plains area going around and looking stuff. And one of the reasons they like the area is there's a lot of big potholes that hold water. So they got water for the horses and mules, and they got plenty of water for themselves as they go out and kind of travel this. But about midway through the summer, it's a warm summer, and Lane gets tired of it and decides, I'm out. Let's get back to town. I'm going to head back east. I'm going to start doing my law. I'm done with this. Now, on the other side, John Howard decides, well, okay, leave me the outfit because I'm going to go back out. I'm not done. They make the agreement. Howard gets the outfit. Lane goes back east and has a very productive career in law. John Howard goes back out into the plains. And he enjoys that area. He says the weather's great, grass is great, everything's good, and he's got all this water for these big potholes he's finding everywhere. One day, he's going to get water to make his coffee and stuff in camp, decides to water the horses and mules at this one pothole, and he's there long enough that the sun kind of angles down into it, and he sees something in the bottom, and it's kind of shiny. So he gets down in there and takes out some of this dirt and rocks and stuff and starts panning it out and finds all these flakes of gold. And he goes, this must be washing in out of the foothills and getting trapped in these, moving across the surfaces in these big storms out here in the snow. So he starts going through this. He finds $700 in that first pothole that first day. And he realizes we've been going about it all wrong. We're looking for a vein. We're looking for this. I found gold. It's in the pothole. So he goes around and spends the rest of that summer till it starts to get to fall, cleaning out these potholes. He cleans them all out, heads back into town. I believe the town he goes to, I'm having to use a lot of notes here because there's a lot of working ground. I don't remember the name of the town. Anyways, he goes back into town and he cashes out at, I believe it was $100,000. I'm looking for it here. Yeah, it was $100,000. He's got money. He's doing well. $100,000 back then is nothing to like shake a stick at. So he decides he's just going to return to Boston, go back and practice law, make some investments, happily ever after. Well, a number of years later, he returns because his investments turned bad and things didn't quite go. He was too frugal with his money. And he turns around and comes back to go back out to the potholes to raise some more money. They don't tell it. It was probably 4 or 5 years. So he returns. He goes out, goes through the potholes, and he goes into the area, and every pothole has no gold, nothing. And he doesn't know if he worked them out, or he doesn't know if he's in something of the wrong area. He spends some time, decides, you know what? He's not the same man he was 5 years before. He's changed. He decides to go back east, and he goes back east broke for the trip. Now, it's an interesting story, and you can see where this could work with the potholes. What becomes interesting is a man named Hill is out in this similar area, and he's a cattle guy, and he's out on his horse, and he's traveling, and a desert storm hits, and he gets blinded by it, and the winds and the sand and the dirt, he can't basically stay on the horse. He gets off the horse, but then the storm gets so violent the horse breaks away from him and runs off. He doesn't know which way the horse goes. He's struggling, he's wandering around just before he says basically he was done because he was breathing in more dust and dirt than he was actually air. He finds this little outcropping of boulders with a little ledge to it, so he figures he can use that for some cover and hopefully get out of the wind and the dirt a bit, even though it's been swirling. Well, when he gets down to it, he finds it goes back, and it's not just a little ledge. It kind of goes back about 4 or 5 feet. So he climbs in there, and he realizes, okay, I got oxygen in here. The wind's not cutting through here. I'm very lucky. And he decides to settle down. So he's sitting there for a while, and then he's reaching around, trying to feel his way around what's around him. Dangerous thing, something like that with snakes, but he feels something, leather or cloth, and he's like, what the heck is that? So he starts messing with it, and then finally he feels it tear, and he brings his hand over, and he goes towards the entranceway, and he's holding his hand up and realizes he's got all kinds of gold flakes. Not small, not large, but obviously discernible in his hand, and he's looking at it all, and he's just like, oh my God, these things are full of gold. So he starts feeling around in these, moving them around, a couple more are busting open, and he realizes there's several of these sacks. And then underneath them, there's several bars. These bars are very rough and coarse. He can't see them. He doesn't take one out to look in the light. He says he just felt them by hand. It was getting dark. And he said they were coarse, rough, pitted, but he felt like there was either an X or a cross marked on them. He waits till the next day. The sun's coming up. He realizes he's got to get out of there. He doesn't have any water, doesn't have any supplies. So he decides to travel out of there. He fills his pockets with as much of that gold flake as he can and sees what he can carry with he's got his pants and his pockets of his shirts and so forth. So he starts making off. He sees Black Rock Volcano out in the distance, so he thinks, I'm just going to head for there. There's a small town there, and he's going to just try to make it to the town. And he starts heading that direction, do that direction. It takes him a day or so. He makes it into town, goes down to have the stuff assayed, and I want to make sure I get this right, but what he had to make assayed, well, Fillmore was the town, but what he had assayed came to a decent amount. So he basically said, oh, you know what? It's not enough to retire on. I'm going to go back out, find that spot, take a pack mule, and I'm going to get all that gold and whatever those bars were. Doesn't know if they're gold or silver or what it is. So he gets outfitted, heads back out. He gets kind of where he's outside of town, looks at the Black Rock Volcano, gets his bearings set. Now, he said he crossed a number of potholes that had water, which is what saved him coming back into town through the heat. So he's following this, but there's nothing else really to mark it. And he said the terrain did not seem familiar. He spent the next year or two off and on searching for this, but never could find the boulders and ledges. Well, this leads us to another story, and this is one about a man named Tom Watkins. Now, Watkins, around 1906, is in an area, and he gets into something similar, and the story is there was a storm, and he got kind of waylaid, and he found a ledge to get under, and he found a bunch of gold. Now, this gold is mineral gold that he was able to mine. He broke off some pieces and stuff. And he says, well, you know what, I'll go have that checked out. Turns out it was pretty rich gold. That became the Black Horse Mine. And that also was near the Mabel Mine. Now, the Black Horse Mine, what he brought in was assayed at, I believe, let's make sure I get this right, $5,013 per ton. But the Mabel Mine nearby was over $100,000 per ton. Now, you see how these stories almost fall together, because in each story there are the potholes they were able to drink of, because that was in Tom Watkins' story as well. Watkins finds a ledge in a desert storm, as did the Gentleman Hill. Now, while the other guys didn't find the ledge or anything, they did find plenty of gold. And the suspicion for Howard was there had to be a mine or something that was coming out of the mountains. There had to be some place it came from, or it had to be mined. Someone must have discovered it, but he didn't know anything of it. Now, our final conclusion of this story is a young man named Pedro. He's herding sheep for a livestock company. Now, Pedro's out in the desert, and he moves the sheep here, he moves the sheep there, he moves the sheep over there, then he comes, brings them back over here. And his existence is literally, he's out there. That's his life. He just moves sheep around out there all year long, and someone comes out, brings them supplies. Well, one day he comes into town, and he starts buying everybody drinks and stuff, because he came in with several pounds of gold. It was gold flakes and so forth and all. He claimed that he found this boulders in this ledge, and he went in there and found plenty of gold, and he got all this gold, and he's going to go back and get more, but it set him up. He didn't need to be doing this anymore, and he was going to take off. And everybody, of course, is interested in Pedro, so they're watching Pedro. So Pedro now has to kind of like sit around town till everybody kind of weighs off. And after a few months, Pedro gets it up, and he gets ready to go back out, but then he just disappears. Nobody knows where he goes. They don't see him again. So that would be the end of Pedro. The livestock company went through his things that he left behind and found a map that was written in Spanish with a bunch of symbols and stuff, but it didn't make any heads or tails or sense to them. So they figured because of him spending so much time out there, he kind of knew the places and what these symbols meant to what the terrain he'd been camping in and spending all these years in. So they couldn't figure it out, went out and looked. They couldn't find anything. What makes this story interesting, not only the ledge, and he found the flakes, and he said there were gold bars in this ledge cave, was he shows up again 8 years later. And he shows up in a different town with several pounds of gold and so forth. I think it was 20 pounds of gold, which is nothing to shake a stick at. And he did quite well. And he sold these to a doctor in the town that had the cash and stuff. So he sold 20 more pounds in 1938. And several people recognized and realized that's Pedro. And then he vanished again. And nobody knows what happened to Pedro after that. So Pedro appears to have been traveling in the area, probably getting the gold and then coming back to different towns, selling some gold. And just one time someone recognized him and caught him. So the stories are very interesting, but they seem to take place in Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. Now, most of the stories take place in Utah, in the Plains area. But you can see the similarities. You have the boulders with the ledge. You always have the pothole stories and all these things. And Pedro's story did have potholes he would camp by. It had a ledge. It had gold bars with the big gold flakes. It's hard to say if these stories and locations, things got moved around. Are they completely individual, separate stories? Or are they one and the same story? It seems like each is a possibility. And that's one of the things that happens with the Dutchman stories, is people over the years will change things. And then what happens is people don't know one thing from the other. So every story becomes attached to the other story. And people don't know how to break them apart. Nobody's looking for the Lost Dutchman. They're also looking for the two soldiers. Well, they're looking for Joe Deering's and John Chuning's mines. They're looking for this. They're looking for that. They're looking for the Sleeping Squad treasure. And they're using the Peralta Stone maps, and they think it's all the same thing. And it's probably not. It's probably every single thing is a separate thing. There was mining activity, and the words of the Peraltas had anywhere from 9 to 18 Spanish mines in there that they had worked. Then you have to realize people could have been finding other mines and dumps. Two Soldiers story is predominantly about them finding a dump and finding ore in a dump by an old mine. They don't get too particular into it. So that could have been a covered mine area or something, as far as we know. In Deering's, he talks about there's a hole and there's tailings and stuff. Waltz's story, there's no tailings. He says there's no tailings anywhere near it. You won't find tailings. No prospector will find it by the tailings. So it would seem to eliminate those two, but Jim Bark felt that the stories had to be compatible and one and the same. So that's one of the things you always have to look at, is if you find the soldier's mine, do you find Waltz's mine? Probably not. If you find Deering's mine, do you find the soldier's mine and Waltz's mine? Probably not. They just happen to hit upon different things. And I think this story is a good example of that. So I hope you enjoyed it, not too confused. I did my usual kind of verifying what I could. The problem is with these stories is most of it kind of runs into the area of I couldn't confirm anything too detailed. They seems the park services and all have run with these stories and put dates and things on them. And then I worked on that Harper story and could not find anyone from Harper that died and was originally from Texas and died basically of cancer here in Arizona in that time period. I could not find anyone to fit that bill. So it doesn't mean his name wasn't something else. It just means the Harper probably wasn't what his real name was. I checked Harper first and last. It doesn't mean the story is an outright lie, because Armenta seemed to be a very honest man. So he told a story, but did he get the name wrong, or did one of the authors did, and then it just continued to trickle down. It's a good example of how that treasure hunting and stories and how these types of things don't always work out the way you want. They can be great stories. They can be a great narrative to tell the public and share, but they change so much over the years. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Chasing Legends. I hope you enjoy the rest of them and are starting to have great holidays, because we're getting down to that time of the year where we're going to end it up in another season. Even though we don't take a season break in Chasing Legends, we just go one season into the next. So there you go. So happy holidays to everyone. And remember, the most important thing beyond the holidays, well, kind of, I don't know, have happy holidays. But the other most important thing is, remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.